Hey makeup friends, I recently watched a video from Baddie Bean where she shared which palette from every brand she would declutter if she had to declutter one from each brand. And I thought it was such an interesting idea that I wanted to do it as well. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's get into this. As always, I want to start off by welcoming you back to my channel, or if you're new here, then hello and welcome. My name is Kara, and on my channel, we like to mix beauty, brains, and the occasional F-bomb. On my eyes today, I'm wearing shades from the new palette from Nomad Cosmetics. This is the Whistler Snow Lodge palette. I will have a video coming on it soon, but I wanted to at least spotlight it today. And on my lips, I am wearing two products from Gerard Cosmetics. One is the lip pencil in Sugar and Spice, and then I have it topped with the lipstick called Kimchi Doll, which has apparently grown legs in the last like 20 minutes and walked out of my room because I have absolutely no idea where it is. If you could see the state of my desk, you wouldn't be surprised because there is stuff everywhere. It will turn up, but not in time for the purposes of showing it to you right now. So, with that said, let's dive into this. So I did go through my entire palette collection, bearing in mind that I did a pretty thorough declutter back in December. So I've already decluttered quite a few palettes. Regardless, we're looking at it fresh as though I had to declutter one from every brand. Now, much like Betty Jean, she decided in her video that if she only had one palette from a brand, she wasn't going to include that in her video, which I think makes a lot of sense. I've taken it one step further, and palettes or brands where I only have two palettes from them, I've also excluded those. But any brands where I have three or more palettes, I have put them in the mix, and so we're just going to go through them in alphabetical order. So first up is Anastasia Beverly Hills. I do have, I think, 4 palettes left from them, and the one that I use the least is the Jackie Aina palette. Now I do want to preface this video by saying these palettes that I'm saying I would declutter are not necessarily palettes that I want to declutter. They all survived the great declutter of December 2021, and so these are palettes that I love, but if I had to declutter one from the brand, this is the one that would go. I do think this is a beautiful palette, but I do get a lot more use out of my Soft Glam palette, my Modern Renaissance, and certainly my Sultry palette. So those are the ones I would keep, and this is the one that I would say goodbye to. Next up is Adept Cosmetics, and I would be hard-pressed to declutter any of my palettes from Adept. But again, for the purposes of the video, I'm pretending like I absolutely have to, and the one that I would say goodbye to would be the Kodan Palette. Again, this is a beautiful palette, but I do get a lot more use out of my Ninhydrin and my Plain Jane palettes, and that is why this is the one I would declutter. Next up is BH Cosmetics, and I would be hard-pressed to say goodbye to any of those palettes because if you know me, you know that I love BH. However, there is one that I don't get as much use out of, and this is where the occasional F-bomb is going to come into play. It's called the Fuck Off palette. So inside you can see it is very deep and moody. There is a nice selection of tones in here, and obviously again this one survived the big purge that I did in December, but it's not a palette that I reach for rather frequently at all. So if I had to say goodbye to one of them, this is the one it would be. That brings us to Blend Bunny, and I would throw elbows if somebody tried to take one of my Blend Bunny palettes because I love them so much. But for the purposes of the video, we're going to go ahead and pretend. So I took a look at the 3 that I have, which are the 3 that are available at this point. There is the Blends palette, the Surge palette, and then their newest, which is the Dollhouse palette. Dollhouse, I will fight you over. That is going absolutely nowhere. And the Blends palette has become my go-to sort of rainbow palette. Not that I wear rainbow looks very often, but basically any color that I'm looking for is in that palette, so I can use it with everything else that I have. So that then leaves us with the Surge palette. Again, I love this palette, truly do. I gave it a very favorable review. Their mattes are just stunning. The matte formulation is perfection. I just don't get a lot of use out of the shimmers and certainly out of the neons. It's just outside of my comfort zone. I have incorporated them into looks in the past, but if I had to choose one that I get the least amount of use out of, it would be Surge, and that's why I would choose this one to declutter. Next up then is Colourpop, and I really did have to take a look at all of my Colourpop palettes. I don't have a huge collection. I did at one point, and then I depotted a lot of them, and then I just kind of never used them when they were put out as singles because I don't know why. I truly don't, but I have to learn to just not depot anything. I always do it thinking I'm going to get more use out of it, and then I end up getting less use out of it, so it's just a futile exercise for me personally. So regardless, I looked at the Colourpop palettes that I do have, and this is the one that I would declutter. So this is the Nightmare Before Christmas palette, which came out in 2021, and I haven't used it yet. I bought it, I think I was sucked in by the packaging, if I'm being perfectly honest. This just isn't really a color story that I would reach for very often. There are shades in there, and I can certainly see different looks that I could make with this, so it's not that I think it's a bad palette by any stretch, but like I said, I've had it for a few months at this point and just haven't seen fit to actually use it yet, which tells me if I'm looking to declutter something, this would be the logical choice. I have 3 of the 5-pan palettes from Dior, and it was really hard to choose which one I would say goodbye to. Ultimately, what I settled on was Tutu. Again, I'm just going to sound like a broken record throughout this entire video. It's not that I dislike this palette because I really do think it's beautiful. I think that the quality of these 5-pan shadows are just excellent. But I like this one a little bit less than Soft Cashmere and a little bit less than Pink Coral, which are the other 2 I have. So this is the one I'd say goodbye to. Moving on from there, we are now jumping into G, and for that we have Gourmand Girls. And the palette that I would say goodbye to would be the Spectra palette. I adore their C'est L'Amour palette, I adore the That Time of Year palette, and I also really like the Exquisite palette as well. And it's not that I dislike Spectra, it's just that I don't get as much use out of this one as I do the other 3. There is quite the variety of shades in here, as you can see, so it does lend itself to a lot of creative options, but I just like the other 3 that much more, so this one gets the boot. From there, we move on to Huda Beauty, and again, I have quite a few Huda Beauty palettes, and the one that I would say goodbye to would be the Gold palette. It would be difficult for me to say goodbye to this one because this shade right here is unlike any other gold that I have in my collection. It's just this true, brilliant yellow gold. There's no green undertone to it, there's no brassiness to it. It's just this perfect yellow gold. I don't wear it very often, but when I want gold, this is the one that I want. And when I did my declutter in December, I was saying when I got to my Huda Beauty palettes that I really am just keeping this palette for that shade. So if I'm looking at having to declutter one of my Huda Beauty palettes, it would make sense to declutter the one where I'm really just in love with one shade rather than a multitude of them. So while it would really hurt my heart, if I had to say goodbye to one, it would be this one. And then we're on to Juvia's Place. And again, I made the same mistake with Juvia's Place that I made with Colourpop in that I depotted a ton of the palettes that I had from them and then regretted it. I mean, I broke most of them in the process, and then the ones that I did have just ended up living in a magnetic palette in my drawer, never seeing the light of day. So lesson learned, not going to depot again in future. I do have a few actual palettes from them, and so if I was going to say goodbye to one of them, it would be this one here, the Blushed Rose. And it's not that I dislike this palette at all, which of course is the theme going on in this video. It's just I already have these shades in other palettes, and I do like the palettes that I have from Juvia's Place more than this one in particular, so this would be the choice. Next up is Kaleidos, and again, this is one of those brands that, like, I will fight you if you try to take my Kaleidos palettes from me because I love them all so much, and it was really difficult to choose one to say goodbye to. The one I ultimately settled on is the same one that Batty Bean did as well, and that is the Cyber Bronze palette. And it's just, I've talked about this palette before, it has nothing to do with the performance of these shades. Like, these metallics, especially this silver, are like next level. They are just beautiful. And again, these mattes, excellent formula to work with. I just find it's a strange sort of combination with like the warm browns and the red and then this silver. Just kind of throws me off a little bit. It's not the end of the world. I just don't know how to make it work cohesively all as one unit. But of course, when I want a silver shade, here's my go-to. But if I had to choose one to say goodbye to, it would be this one, if only because as a palette, I just find it a bit of a strange mixture of colors. Now we get to talk about Lorac, and they have been around forever, but I'm just super late to the party. Like, I'm beyond fashionably late. I just discovered them like 3 months ago. But once I discovered them, I was like, I need them all. And now I have, I think, 5 Lorac palettes, and I really, really like all of them. So choosing one to say goodbye to was pretty difficult. What I settled on ultimately is this one, and I can't tell you what it's actually called because I forgot to look it up and it doesn't say. It's one of the Pro palettes, Pro 3, I want to say. Possibly Pro 4. Like, why don't they put that on here? I am mystified as to why there's no naming whatsoever, but anyways, be that as it may, it's the more purpley toned palette that they offer. Again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the performance of these shades. I do find Lorac to be a little bit funny in that their shimmers really don't look all that exciting in the pan, but they come to life once they're applied. They're so much prettier on the eye than they are in the pan. Could be why very few people actually talk about them because they just don't look exciting. I don't know. Regardless, just about dropped it. Regardless, this is the one that I chose to declutter in this artificial made-up scenario for no real reason other than I just like the other ones a little bit more. These mattes in here, while they do perform absolutely beautifully and they're very nicely pigmented and really blendable, they are very soft and they do kick up a lot of powder in the pan. Whereas I find some of the other palettes, including the newer ones that I have, the Fairy Garden something, Forest Fairy, I can't remember what it's called, and the Soleil palette, and then I have the unzipped palette as well as one of the little 5-pan unzipped palettes. I just find that they're just a little bit less fussy than the powders in here, and that's why this one is being said fake goodbye to. Another L brand is Lunar Beauty, and again, I struggled with this one because I really love my Lunar palettes, but the one that I get the least amount of use out of is the Moonspell 1. I really love Moonspell 2. That one is not going anywhere, but this one is just a very different, I was about to say strange, it's not really strange, it's just a very different collection of shades. I know the camera's having a hard time with that gold reflective background, but I like this one when I like it, if that makes sense. That doesn't make sense. Let me explain. I have to have a good idea going into this palette of what it is that I want to create. And I have to sort of sit and think about it. This one isn't an intuitive palette to me, so I kind of struggle with it. Having said that, once I get past that creative hurdle and I actually do apply this, I'm always happy with the result. And I'm always happy with the process as well. So that's not to knock this palette at all. It's just me personally, I have a little bit of a creative block when it comes to this one, and that's why I'm featuring it in this video and saying goodbye to it. I am trying to come up with a creative way to say, and that's why I would declutter this one 19 times and I'm failing. So I apologize if it becomes very redundant. Okay, let's move on. I think we're on to Natasha Denona next. Again, I have a lot of her palettes, including a lot of her mini palettes, so I looked at all of them together. I didn't just like hive it off into full size versus mini size. I just looked at all of them, which is the one that I would say goodbye to. And it is a 5-pan, although it's the full size 5-pan. This is the palette number 7. And the reason why I would say goodbye to this one is for the same reasons as I said with Kaleidos, is that as a unit, just as a palette on its own, I do find this one a little tricky to work with. There's only one matte in it, and the rest of these shimmery shades are very metallic in nature, so creating a cohesive eye look just using this palette is difficult. Having said that, the shades that are in here, particularly the matte, and then this insanely gorgeous blue, like they are stunning. These are beautiful shades, so I don't want to take away from the palette, but I do find that I have to bring other shades in to make this one work. So that's why I chose this one. Another N brand is Nomad Cosmetics, and I do have 3 of their palettes, and the one that I would say goodbye to would be Land of Fire and Ice. Again, this is just one of those palettes that when I do apply it and when I can get past my own creative hiccups with it, I love the way it applies and I love the way it looks. But this color story presents me with a little bit of a challenge, and that's really just speaking to myself. Again, that's not to knock this palette at all. Again, it survived the big purge that I did where I got rid of, I think it was about 70 palettes out of my collection, so it was significant. There's nothing inherently wrong with this palette at all. It really does come down to my own ability to pair the colors together. I have seen people make absolutely stunning looks with this palette. This is just one of those palettes that when I sit down, I can't just like lift the lid and just start. I really do have to sit and think about it, and in fact this as well as the Moonspell from Lunar Beauty, I do tend to like finger swatch and then sort of pair them on my hands to see how they'll play with each other and just work at it from that way. So on the one hand, I actually do like the challenge that it presents me because it does force me to sort of step outside of my own comfort zone and really push my own envelope. But on the other hand, this isn't a palette that I'm just going to reach and grab in the morning when I'm getting ready for work, because it just takes more time for me to use this successfully, if you will. So that's the only reason that I've put it in this video. Next up, we move on to Odin's Eye, and again, I do have quite a few of their palettes, and again, picking one was a challenge. What I ultimately came down to was this one here, which I'm sure I'm going to pronounce wrong, but it's Solman, I believe it's called, and it is arguably a beautiful palette. I do love this, and this is one that I can just sit down, grab, and apply. But it's also not so different from a multitude of other palettes that I have that I feel I need this one. Obviously I did keep it and I plan to keep it, but if I had to choose one to say goodbye to from Odin's Eye, this is the one that it would be. We have 3 left, so up next is Tart, and the one I would say goodbye to is Lil Juicy. Frankly, love the name, I just think it's adorable. I don't know what it was. We got a newsletter once upon a time from the Ontario SPCA. We donate monthly to the OSPCA, so we get newsletters and all sorts of mail things throughout the year, but one of them had a picture of a little rabbit. I think they were the featured pet of the month or whatever the case was. I can't quite remember, it was years ago, but I still remember his name. It was Lil Bit, L-I-L apostrophe Bit. And I almost adopted this damn rabbit because his name was Lil Bit. That's just adorable. Anyways, Lil Juicy. Here we have it here. This was part of a trio of palettes that they released. I think it was holiday of 2020, if I recall correctly. I put 2 of them into a giveaway, but I selfishly kept this one for myself, and here I am saying it's the one that I would get rid of. The reasoning for that is because I have it sitting right in front of me. You've seen me work on this one forever. I am trying to actually pan the Tartlet in Bloom, and so it's become very personal at this point, and I don't want to say goodbye to that one. And then the other palette that I have from them is the Great Big palette that they just put out. I can't remember what it's called, Full Bloom or In Full Bloom, the giant one. At any rate, that one has quite a few of these shades. Arguably, I wish it had this kind of tone in there. It doesn't, but it works really well with this palette. But I would rather keep the giant palette than the smaller one here, so that was my reasoning on this one. Urban Decay is next, and I did declutter a few of my Urban Decay palettes when I did my big declutter in December, so we're really just like looking at the cream of the crop in my opinion here, so it was kind of hard to pick them. And the one that I ultimately decided on was this guy here, Party Favor. The reasoning for it is that, again, as a palette just on its own, I can't make a complete eye look with this. What I really like this palette for is if I'm doing really simple makeup, like just throwing some bronzer in the crease, I can stick my finger in here, swipe it all over the lid, and I'm good to go. That's what I love this palette for. I don't need this palette because I do have these shades scattered throughout multiple other palettes, so that's why I'm saying that this is the one I would say goodbye to, but that's not to take away from this one because it is really pretty for what it is. That then is going to bring us to Viseart, and again I have quite a few of their palettes, and ultimately the one that I said that I would say goodbye to is this guy here, the Paris Étoile palette. Now let me tell you a little story about this one and impulse shopping. So as soon as I saw Viseart announce this on their Instagram, I immediately hopped over to their website, added it to cart, paid an insane amount of shipping to get it because I just could not wait the extra like 2 days for it to hit Beautylish, and I haven't used it since. I haven't used it once. I paid almost double for this palette with the shipping costs and I have not used it. What? I don't know why I like had to have it, because now that I look at it, like there's not a lot of places that I would wear this palette just on its own because it is so deep and smoky. I do love a good deep smoky eye moment, but on a day-to-day basis, that's definitely not the look that I'm going for. There was a disconnect between how badly I thought I needed this and how badly I actually needed this. That's been a bit of a learning curve for me. It's still an ongoing process. I don't think I'll ever 100% have all of that in check, but this one in particular really kind of tipped the scales for me. So going into 2022, I've been very conscientious of the items that I'm buying and really considering each purchase because, like I said, I paid basically double for this palette just to get it because I was so on fire for it, and I haven't used it yet, which is ridiculous. So when I'm putting all of these away, I'm actually going to leave this one sitting out on my desk so that I use it, because at least then I can say I've at least used it. But with all of that said, those are the palettes from every brand that I would declutter if I had to declutter one from each. I would love to hear from you down below. Just pick a few brands, let me know. If you are a content creator, I would love to see you do this video as well. Give credit to Batty Bean, not me. This was her idea. I'm just capitalizing on it over here, but I would love to see that because I think this is a really interesting take on it. We see a lot of videos of what's my favorite from each brand, but I really like going through this kind of process and hearing people's thoughts on the palettes from this perspective. So if you do recreate this video, of course, give credit to Betty Jean, but I'd also love to know, so feel free to like tag me if you want to, because I really want to watch. I think it's really interesting. But with all that said, I'm going to wrap the video up here. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed to the channel already, I ask that you consider doing so. For now though, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I will see you in my next video. Until then, just be a decent human being. Bye for now.